Thank you very much, Julia. And now we're following up with Julia Hagenberg, who's the head of education of the art collection in North Rhine-Westphalia. And before, she was also the head of art education at the Art Museum in Stuttgart. And she will talk about her experience within the project of Museum Global and their program that they did alongside the exhibition at the collection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, for organizing this conference. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm happy to tell you more about our approach of the Learning Museum. The projects I'm going to present today are the result of the work and the commitment of many people, of my colleagues from the education and the curatorial team, some are here today, and especially of our partners from outside the museum. I will come back to that. I don't feel represented here. This is what an intern said to me in a conversation in 2015. Prior to our conversation, the young woman, a student at a vocational college, had looked closely at the collection and had analyzed the works being exhibited for herself. She had come to the conclusion, and I quote, "The collection shows neither female nor African artists." She also noted that people of color didn't even feature as subjects in the pictures. At the time of our conversation, the research project Global Museum had just begun. Our education department was involved from the very beginning. Unlike the normal procedure, we could start with our work long before the actual subjects of an exhibition had been defined. This gave us the extraordinary opportunity to critically analyze the foundations that, of the work that we do. With the goal in mind of questioning the Western Eurocentric focus of the collection, and to quote from the program of the German Federal Cultural Foundation, to present a view of what the future of museums might look like, we used this opportunity to critically reflect on those attitudes and structures in the institution that had served as a basis for the collection up to that point. As we all know, curators as well as museum educators are powerful actors when it comes to establishing a canon. This is why it is our job to promote what Regine Prangl calls a reflection on the criteria of canon formation per se. In the conversation with the intern, I realized that the impulse of Global Museum would have an immediate impact on anyone interacting with the museum. The ones working in it, the ones visiting it, and the ones deliberately not visiting it. At the same time, it became clear that there was a profound knowledge of the issue we had planned to address already out there. The question was thus, how can we find out more about this knowledge and how can we reflect it in the museum? To quote Marcelo Resende, director of the Archive of the Avantgarde in Dresden, how can we create a system in which the educators help the museum to learn from the community? Resende's talk at our symposium in Düsseldorf in 2017 encouraged us to rethink the role of the museum and to understand it as an institution that can and must learn from society. In order to initiate such a learning process, we launched a variety of programs. We hosted workshops concerning post-colonial theory and anti-racism, and we worked with focus groups and school classes with whom we explored the existing attitudes toward the museum and the artworks it holds. In this way, we learned not only more about the interests and needs of the people participating, we also learned more about ourselves and our own blind spots. Admitting to having blind spots offered an important starting point for this learning process. The starting point was the question of what influences our perspectives. Who are we, the academically trained staff? Who do we, the academically trained staff, represent? Who don't we represent? and who might we unconsciously be excluding from the museum as a result? Keeping in mind that we are all university graduates and that most of us are white. In the project Open for Construction, the renegotiation of an art collection, we asked focus groups to engage with modernist artworks as well as discuss the concept of the canon and the purpose of an art museum. And in a specifically designed exhibition set in our labor, the participants developed their own approaches to pictures from the collection and to works that are not part of the Western canon of art. In a series of workshops, they explored various exhibitive and educational strategies. At the end, they presented their personal perspectives in the form of an exhibition in which they encouraged the museum and the public to discuss their own views. A decisive part of the workshop comprised conversations between the focus groups, museum educators, and curators. In these discussions, everyone had an equal voice. In classic museum programs, curators and educators mostly function as experts, while the visitors take on the passive role of listeners. In this case, however, the idea was for all parties involved to learn from one another. This image shows one of these discussions, which took place in the presentation by young participants aged 15 to 25. Let me briefly talk about this example. After the young participants had inspected the collection, they made it clear, to my surprise, that they really liked the quiet, calm atmosphere in the museum. That having been said, they also expressed their interest in additional spaces that would encourage people to stay longer, to talk to others, and to relax. With this in mind, they installed rugs and beanbags in the labor, and after they saw a photograph of the collection from 1986, to be seen here, they included some plants. The overall idea by this young group therefore represented a mix between an intense engagement with strategies of exhibiting and a precise analysis of their own needs, both of which they made clear in their presentation. The program for school classes was also designed as a mutual learning process. In this program, the students participating again were invited to develop their own approaches to art in the museum. In this case, in addition to other methods, we worked with symbolic speech bubbles on which students wrote their questions and comments. The speech bubbles made the participant voices visible and were presented in the K20. I'd like to talk about a few examples to illustrate the young people's perspectives. Many students asked questions that had to do with the institution of the museum itself, its foundation and its mission. These questions inspired us to think about what most museums take for granted and therefore don't communicate to visitors. But assuming that people are familiar with the institution, its purpose and its history, actually excludes all those from the museums to whom these things are not obvious. This is what the speech bubbles show. The students also commented on the pictures and the criteria for their selection. The answers to these questions could not be found in the collection itself. There were no explanations for why the artworks have been chosen. However, if the criteria for why certain works are collected and exhibited are not made clear, this can create the impression that the selection of works is neutral and that it claims to be universally valid. This seeming neutrality can have a powerful effect, as Emilia Zizia analyzed, and I quote, "The apparent neutrality of museums' discourse and invisibility of their positioning can lead to a reinforcement of oppressive and exclusionary structures." As with the intern at the beginning of my talk, these students were also quick to notice that art from outside of Europe and art by women was missing in the collection. So when confronted with the institutional discourse as represented by the collection at that time, the students' questions expressed a kind of self-empowerment. They signaled a critical awareness, one that we want to encourage and to learn from. The collaboration with the focus groups and school classes provided us with vital input for planning the open space, the project that finally accompanied the exhibition Museum Global in Düsseldorf. The open space was both the result of the programs that came before it and the starting point of new learning opportunities. With this project, the museum opened its wall to the square in front of the K20 for the first time in its history, thus symbolically opening itself to the urban community. The large exhibition hall in front of the building was converted into a place that visitors, also those who had never been at the museum before, could discover and use for themselves. The idea was based on the theory of the third place, coined by the urban sociologist Ray Oldenburg. As many of you probably know, Oldenburg distinguishes between the first place, which is the home, the second place, which is the workplace, and third places, where people meet and socialize. Third places are typically easy to access and have a non-commercial and playful character. The aim of the Open Space project was to create such a place in the museum. We wanted people to meet there, to talk to other people, including museum staff, drink coffee, read, use the Wi-Fi, play and be creative, chill and take part in events. All of this in conjunction with visiting the exhibition or not. The Berlin-based architects Raumlabor Berlin were commissioned with the planning. In close collaboration, we developed a design concept for the space that would make many different uses possible. The idea was to install types of pavilions to divide the hall into several areas, including an information desk with an archive and media stations, a cafe, workshop spaces, a so-called parliament, which was a place for discussions, and an arena where larger events could take place. Because the project was meant to be temporary, we asked Raumlabor Berlin to incorporate a sustainable interior architecture. For this reason, the architects decided to search through our storage area so they could use as many materials already on hand as possible. For example, exhibition walls and construction modules. These used exhibition materials not only served our strategy of sustainability, by showing elements of the construction that are usually hidden, the architects also made the means of presentation visible that museums use. In a metaphorical sense, the powerful gesture of representing was thus deconstructed and an alternative, transparent museum structure was created. Through their design qualities on the one hand and their practical use on the other, the installation appealed to completely different types of visitors. Some people interpreted the constructions as exhibition objects, while others regarded them as objects to be used. On one day, we might find ourselves having a conversation with designers interested in the language of forms, while on another day, we might watch school kids working and napping in the parliament. The quality of time spent in the space also played an important role. As mentioned, this issue had already been addressed by the focus groups. The younger participants especially had wanted spaces in the museum that could accommodate their social and physical needs. The open space fulfilled this wish in many regards. It was a place to meet people in a relaxed atmosphere and a place to touch objects and explore them with your senses. A place where you could sit, lie down, or even slide. This seems an important aspect to me. The primary focus of many museums is to engage people intellectually. But we have to ask ourselves whether this isn't perhaps because of our own focus as academics. In the open space, we didn't distinguish between intellectual, emotional, and physical needs. Instead, we took a holistic approach, and this proved successful. We also took this aspect into account when planning the program of events. Thanks to the funding from the German Federal Cultural Foundation and the Commerzbank Foundation, most of these events were free of charge. The program included panel discussions, readings, concerts, and workshops, and they focused on the role of the museum in the migration society, while also exploring art historical and post-colonial issues. In order to attract a broad audience, the spectrum of events was intentionally wide and ranged from Afropop workshops to academic conferences. In the program, we collaborated with various local and international partners, among them participants of the focus groups. Our partners included diverse institutions, kindergartens, schools, universities, intercultural and anti-racist initiatives, the label Calcutta Records, the music club Goldsheim, the Africa Film Festival Cologne, the German Federal Agency for Civic Education, and many more. Our collaborations were and still are based on an extended definition of expertise, one that not only approves art historical, but different types of knowledge and experience. And I'm very thankful to Bill, who introduced the concept of extra-disciplinary knowledge this morning, which I found very interesting. At the information desk, we were in close contact with the visitors. Through these encounters, we were able to notice that the audience was more diverse than usual. The feedback also confirmed this impression. I'd like to show you 2 examples. The note on the left illustrates the unpretentious character of the space. It's funny, but at the same time it's really touching, I think, because it speaks to the feeling of being excluded from the urban community. The content and style indicate that the author is most likely not one of the museum's regular visitors. The second comment confirmed that we had achieved what we set out to do. It might even seem that we paid the person to write it. In this comment, the person visits the open space rather by accident, becomes curious about the museum, and spontaneously goes to see the exhibition. Over time, word spread about the program, and it was very well received. To quote one user, the unrestricted possibilities of using the space led people to appropriate it in various individual ways. Quite a few came regularly. Parents played with their children, seniors read the paper, and students from the art academy worked on their drawings. It became the meeting point for a bicycle initiative and an informal philosophy group. One day, somebody even celebrated his birthday in the open space. All of these uses evolved without us taking an active role. Usually, art museums regard themselves as places of beholding, where visitors experience art and gain knowledge about it. With the Open Space project, the K20 became a place of production, both in the material sense, meaning through the production of texts, prints, objects, and choreographies, as well as in the non-material sense, in the form of producing knowledge and ideas, exchanging viewpoints, establishing new contacts, and building communities. Many users were in favor of the open space becoming a permanent part of the K20. As the feedback demonstrates, this project created expectations that the museum may or may not be able to fulfill in the long term. To quote Nora Sternfeld, such an experiment always means that we have to face the conflictuality of such a space for coming together and debating. The limited duration of the project led to the question of whether or not it was meant seriously. If yes, then shouldn't we have such a space permanently? The immense interest generated by the project set off an intense discussion within the museum, with the result that the open space will reopen in 2020. I'm very happy that Susanne Gensheimer has made this decision. So, as Hortensia Völker said yesterday evening, the Global Museum project ultimately leads to the question of how we define the purpose of an art museum in the future. Are we really prepared to question our privileges and work on our blind spots? To thus critically reflect on the epistemic power the institution is still representing? From my point of view, our willingness to learn from and with this society will be crucial. Thank you.